In the county of Durham, northeast England, a quiet hill known as Pontop Pike rises above the moors. Thousands of people drive past every day, seeing only the tall transmitter mast it's known for. But recently, as I studied old maps, routes and strange lines across the hills, it became clear this quiet moor was once something very different. 3 centuries ago, it lay at the heart of one of the northeast's most productive industrial landscapes. Today it feels remote. Wind over grass, long views across the hills. In the 17th century, however, it was the centre of a crisis. Britain had developed an addiction, coal. Demand was exploding. London alone consumed vast quantities. Hearths, breweries, glassworks, salt pans and lime kilns all depended on it. In many ways, coal in the 17th century was what electricity is to us today. Almost everything people relied on quietly depended on it, and much of it from the northeast. The nearby port of Newcastle had become a great export gateway. Ships leaving the Tyne in a constant procession. The capital didn't just demand coal, they depended on it. But first, the coal had to reach the river. Coal lay thick beneath hills like Pontop Pike, but moving it was slow, expensive and brutal. Packhorses carried roughly 700 pounds or about 300 kilos in panniers slung across their backs, over narrow twisting tracks and trains of 10 to 30 animals. Even so, a train might move only 5 or 6 tons. Wagons carried more, but struggled on rutted, muddy roads. Axles snapped, wheels sank, horses strained. The Tyne was the true highway. But first, coal had to conquer the hills. How do you move enormous quantities of coal efficiently long before the railways existed? That problem would reshape this land. Landowners and coal operators experimented. If wagons struggled on ordinary roads, perhaps the road itself could change. In 1603, Huntington Beaumont, a gentleman adventurer, demonstrated wooden rails with flanged wheel wagons at Wollerton, near Nottingham. 1 horse could pull loads that had previously required many. Critics doubted the idea. Wooden rails would rot, floods washed them away, and packhorses had served Britain faithfully for centuries. Yet the advantage was undeniable. By 1621, the Wickham Grand Lease Way, built under the Grand Lease Coal Partnership, connected pits at Wickham to the River Tyne. Wagons rolled steadily downhill to riverside staiths, tipping coal into keels. Infrastructure, not experiments, tied coal to trade. Over the next century, waggonways spread across the northeast. Whenever coal met difficult ground, rails followed. Gradually, they formed a web across the landscape, much like a modern motorway network linking cities, except these roads carried coal instead of cars. But how exactly did the system work here? Near Pontop Pike, where did the wagons run, cross valleys, and what survives today? This is Rails and Revolutions. The history that built us, the forces that shaped us. To look at one of these systems today, I'm following the Western Way. It's one of the more dramatic but lesser known waggonways of the network. And I'm on a bit of a hunt. I'm looking for traces, remnants and evidence of the people who reshaped this land centuries ago. Surprisingly, a fair share of the structures remains, some quite dramatic, and I'm eager to see the lengths they went to carve these lines across the hills. We begin on high ground. Pontop Pike does not advertise its past easily. But in the mid-18th century, long before the days of radio and TV, Pontop Pike was alive of collieries. Pontop, Halo, Delight, Lily. Coal lay thick beneath the soil, but profit required movement, so the hills were reshaped. Once across this land ran a line that carried thousands of tons of coal towards the waiting rivers. I'm tracing that path now, but more than that, I'm trying to inhabit it. Imagine the creak of timber rails, the rhythmic pull of horses, the smell of coal dust, the toil of men moving loads far heavier than I can lift. Each turn, each terrace is not just a clue, it's a small revelation about human ingenuity and perseverance. We start here at what is presently the edge of a housing estate at Catchgate, which at the time of the Waggonway's construction would have been remote, difficult to access moorland. Today, dramatic it is not, but the drama will come later. For now, this is the furthest point of the system that remains accessible, the start of our journey showing this particular example of this revolutionary network. The journey we are taking is not necessarily the most direct route that a wagon would have taken through the system. But our route will allow me to show you some of the surviving infrastructure from that period. Rails of oak or elm once sat here, 4 feet 8 inches apart, pegged into sleepers. Beneath them, stone ballast drained water away. Drainage ditches ran alongside. Loaded wagons rolled downhill towards the river, each carrying roughly 2.5 tons. On a road, that would have meant teams of horses working together. On rails, a single animal leaned forward and the wagon obeyed. It was the difference between dragging something across sand and sliding it across ice. From Catchgate, the line begins its controlled descent towards the distant stays at Derwenthaugh. Coal moves through it the way blood moves through veins, feeding collieries, coke ovens, and the river trade beyond. After this point, we'll leave the main descent and follow a lesser known alignment. On later maps it is labelled simply as a tramway, but its construction and position suggests something older. This was part of the original wooden Waggonway network, and it contains one of the system's most intriguing features, a tunnel. Marked clearly on the historic mapping, the only tunnel shown anywhere on this route. Today, one end of the alignment has disappeared beneath the modern housing estate. The other offers no dramatic stone portal, no archway, no collapsed entrance. Instead, there is almost nothing. Almost. A single wooden post stands in isolation, positioned precisely where the tunnel mouth should have been. I crouch beside it, imagining the tunnel just beyond, a hidden archery that once carried coal silently under the land. Being here, I feel a strange connection, like touching history, but without words, sensing the human ambition and daring that is embedded in the very soil itself. Above where the tunnel would have run, there is a conspicuous absence of development. No heavy buildings sit directly above the alignment. Only a sports pitch stretches across it. Open ground. Unloaded ground. This invites a question. Does the tunnel still exist beneath this field? If it was built with lightly lined stone, without later engineering standards, its condition by the time it was decided to develop the land above will be unknown. The safest decision may simply have been avoidance. No records confirm survival, but the landscape does not contradict it either. Do you think it could have survived under this field, or is it long gone? Share your thoughts. Let's see what theories we can come up with together. Delight Colliery, with its extensive coke ovens, supplied Surtees pit with some of that coke. The Waggonway was not simply a downhill export route to the river. It was part of an internal industrial ecosystem, moving fuel between collieries to keep production alive. In many ways, it worked like a modern logistics network, with materials moving between sites before finally reaching the port. At the time of the Waggonways, steam locomotives was still a distant dream. The entire concept hadn't even been imagined. Here, I'm searching for evidence of how they made it work. Pulling power relied on horses, and those horses needed care. At Dipton, the remains of Waggonway stables still stand. Solid brick and stone walls. Thick masonry not built for ornament, but endurance. This was the service station of the 18th century. Horses were changed here, fed here, sheltered here, before hauling empties back uphill. Before steam, horsepower was king. Loaded wagons descending from Pontop required controlled braking and steady handling. Returning empties required strength on the climb. This was an operational node in an early industrial transport network. The Waggonway was not just a track, it was an ecosystem. These stables tell a story I never expected to find. A network built for living, breathing animals as much as coal. I pause here, letting the silence settle, and I realise how much human history is entwined with the natural world. Horses, men, coal, they were all part of a fragile balance. Discovering this, seeing it with my own eyes, gives me a deep respect for the scale of coordination and care required, and a sense of awe at how quietly this all unfolded centuries ago. Rejoining the visible line, now preserved as a public footpath, we continue our descent into the valley. under the trees, another vanished structure reveals itself. Historic maps show a viaduct branching towards Surtees Pit, carrying wagons across a relatively small stream, which around here is known as a burn. Sitting in its own steep gorge, connecting the pit directly into the network. The structure, presumably made of wood, would have fallen into ruin once it was no longer required, but the embankments endure. Raised approaches cut cleanly through the woodland. LiDAR imaging traces their geometry with precision. But even without technology, the earth tells a story. Two opposing banks facing one another across the hollow. Trees now grow from the embankments themselves, their roots threaded through the compacted fill, their height marking the generations that have passed since wagons rolled across this span. As the Waggonway proceeded, it cut through what is now the heart of Burnhopefield, across an embankment where this bridge stands today, passing a quarry that's now hidden in the woods. From here, we can either head east and follow the original Western Way, which at one point splits into two, in use from 1712 to 1732, or we can go west and follow the later Western 3, which was built in 1728. Both offer lessons in human adaptation and engineering daring. But the question arises, which line best overcame the challenges of nature, and which one risked more lives for innovation? It just so happens that both have things to show us. So first of all, I'm going to follow the original line. Then we shall look at the later Western Way 3, as that had an extreme challenge I want to show you. But first, we follow the original line, as there is something down here where the medieval and industrial eras crossed. As the Waggonway continued, it eventually arrived outside the suitably named Packhorse Inn. Centuries before timber rails cut across these hills, coal and goods moved differently. Long trains of pack horses wound the way along narrow tracks, each animal carrying panniers stacked with coal, lime, or even provisions. The route was slow, arduous, and unpredictable. Winter could halt a whole supply chain. Although it may not have been built until the late 1700s, the Packhorse Inn at Burnhopefield sits right on one of these ancient routes. I'm struck by the thought that even alongside the Waggonway, a few pack horses might still have clattered past well into the early 1800s. The name preserves a memory of that older world, a time when horsepower ruled and these inns were lifelines. Standing here, you can feel the connection to those struggling men and animals, and start to see why this landscape was so carefully engineered. The worlds of the earlier packhorse trails and later waggonways intersected here. The Waggonway passes beside the Packhorse Inn, almost as if acknowledging its predecessor. Old and new, tradition and revolution, meeting at a single point. You can almost imagine the horse trains clattering past, the inn's half swarming tired men, while nearby timber rails silently promised a future of efficiency and scale. The Packhorse Inn is a relic of what once was, standing quietly as the Waggonway begins to reshape the hills. This inn stood at the meeting point of two transport revolutions, one medieval, one industrial. Beyond, the Waggonway split into two. The Bucksnook one western way following the route of the present Fellside Road, and Bucksnook 2, a northern branch, cutting across Snipes Dean, which is now located in the private magnificent Gibbside estate. If you are ever visiting here, there is a considerable embankment constructed for the Waggonway, surviving in the woods. After that, it cuts across what is now a golf course, where horses and wagons once jostled along timber rails. Golfers now navigate fairways and greens. The challenge has changed from hauling tons of coal to mastering precision on the course. But the land still guides movement. Embankments and terraces rise subtly underfoot, a memory of industrial purpose now quietly shaping sport. The irony is not lost. What was once a hub of labour and logistic now demands strategy, patience and skill of an entirely different kind. After their reunion at the present location of the golf course's entrance, the rails then followed what is now Fellside Road, eventually skirting the outskirts of modern Swalwell, before crossing the River Derwenthaugh on a long-lost bridge near Axwell Park, and onto the purpose-built stays at Derwenthaugh. But we are not going to be travelling there just yet, because first we shall return to Burnside and follow the later Western Way 3, which will ultimately take us to the same destination. By the late 1720s, competition within the northeast coal trade had become fierce. Powerful coal-owning partnerships were battling for control of routes to the rivers, because whoever controlled the transport controlled the trade. Negotiations between two of the dominant groups, the Grand Allies and the Western Partnership, had attempted to create a monopoly over the routes, bringing coal down from these hills. But in 1728, those negotiations collapsed, and when they did, a new Waggonway was born. Its driving force was Lady Jane Clavering, a formidable landowner determined to secure her own route to the river. Construction of what became known as the Third Western Way began that same year. Back at Burnhopefield, where the Waggonway 3 branched off, the line ran down towards what is now known as the Girder Footbridge at Brian's Leap Gill. There the Waggonway crossed the ravine on what was described as a substantial bridge. From there, the line doubled back across the gill near Leap Mill, using an embankment that still survives today. Then it followed the line towards Rowland's Gill, and on towards the River Derwent. Between Burnhopefield and the river lay a descent that would terrify any engineer. Nearly 500 feet lost in less than 3/4 of a mile. The solution was what was described as one of the most ambitious pieces of wooden Waggonway engineering ever attempted. At Busty Bank, huge earthworks was constructed to control the descent by lessening the gradient. Later accounts described them as the most difficult and expensive works undertaken on any Waggonway up to that time. Unfortunately, the documents describing their construction and finished form have not survived. But the most dramatic structure stood at the river crossing itself, although standing today is the Derwenthaugh Bridge, which was built in 1869, replacing a wooden structure which itself was a temporary structure after the original was destroyed in floods. The river here is wide, which means the arch could not have been low. Estimates suggest the embankment above it may have risen 50 or even 60 feet above the river below. Sadly, no drawings survive that show this once magnificent structure. In scale, it may have rivaled the famous Causey Arch, an impressive nearby structure that we will be examining shortly. From here, the Waggonway made its way along the western side of the River Derwent. Down through Winlayton Mill and on to Axwell Park before being joined by the original Western Way 1. From there, it was on to the final destination before the river, the Derwenthaugh Staithes. The original timber loading structures on the east bank of the Derwent have long since vanished, but their footprint reshaped the shoreline. Together with the Townfield Way, Western Way 3 represented the peak of wooden waggonway engineering. These were no longer simple timber tracks across farmland. They were industrial transport systems built on a scale approaching the railways that would follow a century later. The Grand Allies attempted to challenge the new route in court, but the case failed, and in 1728 the Western Way was finally established. From the Derwent, the coal moved to the Tyne, from the Tyne to the sea, from the sea to London. It was an 18th century supply chain stretching from a Durham hillside to the fireplaces of the capital. These were private railways, and power ran along them as surely as coal. To build across land required wayleaves. Permission had to be negotiated and was often expensive. Some coal owners altered their gauge to exclude rivals. Infrastructure became strategy. By 1726, the Grand Allies emerged, pooling resources and controlling output. Waggonways were shared, withheld, expanded or redirected. The physical lines on this landscape were the visible expression of invisible agreements. Timber rails, stone sleepers, political muscle. But if you want to understand how ambitious these early railways could have become, you have to step a few miles east into the wooded gorge of Beamish, where something extraordinary was built. A bridge unlike any Britain had seen before. Completed in 1726, the Causey Arch was not just a piece of infrastructure. At the time, it was the longest single-span bridge in the country, with a span of over 100 feet and standing roughly 80 feet above the wooded ravine of Causey Burn. This was a bold leap of engineering, funded by the powerful Grand Allies colonial owners. It carried 2 tracks of horse-drawn waggonway, one to carry coal towards River Tyne and another for the empty wagons returning uphill. On a busy day, over 900 wagons might have rumbled across it. The man entrusted with the stone span was Ralph Wood, a master mason from the region. It is said that Wood had already built a prior bridge at the site, but that earlier structure collapsed. When it came to the stone arch, he was so haunted by the fear that it too might fall. The tradition holds he destroyed himself by jumping from the newly completed structure. That tragedy gives the arch a very human edge. It's easy to see a grand stone monument on a hillside today, but beneath it lies the story of a man wrestling with his own doubts and the enormity of what he had attempted. Nearly 3 centuries on, the arch still stands, restored and reinforced in the 1980s, and now a Grade 1 listed monument, a testament to the ambitions and anxieties of the early industrial age. But even more of a tourist draw, according to some sources, was the nearby embankment. Predating the arch, this embankment with its 80-metre long stone culvert was completed in 1717, making this both the world's first railway embankment and culvert. Back on Pontop Pike, the changes were subtler. Wood wore down, iron plates were nailed atop rails. Maintenance crews worked these terraces, hammer in hand. The men who cared for the lines became plate layers. Timber would not last forever. Iron rails began replacing wood. The principles developed and refined here prepared the way for locomotion. Steam did not invent the railway, it inherited it. Much like the first cars inherited the roads built for horses. The gradients, the gauges, the maintenance culture. The stable blocks at Dipton, the span at Causey. These were not primitive beginnings. They were a system approaching maturity. Today, grass softens the terraces on Pontop Pike. Trees, root into ballast, laid by men who likely never imagined they were building the future. Walking these lines, I can't help but reflect on the quiet persistence of human effort. The choices made here centuries ago ripple into today's landscape. And standing here in this space, I feel the odd mix of insignificance and belonging. Small in the face of history, yet part of its ongoing story. A witness to what ingenuity, labour and determination can leave behind. The stables at Dipton endure quietly. The embankments stride across fields. The ghost of a viaduct lingers in contour. And the riverbank still remembers timber stays. Walking these lines, we are walking the bones of an industry that fought relentlessly against time, weather, and human error. They are not romantic ruins. Each terrace, embankment, and stone tells a story of struggle, of perseverance, and of small victories snatched from impossible odds. If you still stand long enough on a surviving section of this now ancient transport system, you can almost sense it again. The slow, steady roll of wooden wheels riding on wooden rails, heading for the river.